Okay, so with the print writer, which was our choice to do what we just did, pretty much the methods that you can use are print, which looks familiar, println, which also looks very familiar, close is the signal that we're done, okay, and there's also flush, which means that I want to update my file immediately and now, right? So flush, basically, remember, we're using this buffer input output. What it means is that when you look at this, let me just do a small illustration of this. Clearly we have our program, right? So this is our application. It sits somewhere in memory, okay? And so clearly we use some data here, some data that we use inside of our application. But when we use this BufferedReader to process our information, what this object does, it places somewhere in a buffer, okay? And so it sits there temporarily, you know, character by character, and it's not stored in a file, right? So this is like our file system. This is our disk, you know, traditional disk, and perhaps we want to write into the file. So the BufferedReader says, as long as I just given you information that I was able to accept your information and store it temporarily in memory, you should be all set. Don't worry about this data. It will be written at some point. Now I am responsible for taking care of that for you. However, you may say that I want this to happen now. As soon as I want to say now, you can say flush. You can tell your output object to flush, and what flush does, it will force this this memory to be physically written into the file at that point, or as soon as possible. Basically, the operating system itself can be busy, and as soon as it can, it will give the BufferedReader object to go ahead and update the file and write information into the file. So why use buffered I/O, right? So this is some kind of a memory buffer that we have. So using it is great because this gives much more flexibility to both Java virtual machine and also the operating system and file system to process this information when those layers, those subsystems see best, they have best chance to do something like that, so that the work is balanced between multiple threads on these multi-processing, multi-threading systems. And this is really a way to go, because this is the way the operating system likes to process files. The only time when you want unbuffered I/O, really, the only time when you want to do something like that, if you're designing your own database, okay? If you're designing your own database, it's a kind of very sophisticated type of programming, because you have to very nicely understand what the operating system needs from you to be able to lock specific regions of files and guard it against any kind of corruption by potentially multiple users, multiple processes that want to concurrently use that database, right? One user could want to write information into the file, a specific region of the file. Another user could try reading it, and you need to essentially understand the needs of all of the users. And this is the only time, pretty much, when you want to use something like unbuffered I/O. For everything else that you do with files, I would say that you should always use buffered I/O, because this is the nicest, the quickest, and the easiest type of file work that you can do. All right. So we will perhaps come back to the aspects of multiple users trying to access the same files at the same time. But for now, let's go back and discuss a little bit more of a variety of what you can do with the print writer. All right. So clearly you can say print and println. So these are simple demonstrations. We don't have to spend much time with that. creating a delimited text file simply means what we just did was essentially a delimited text file is the format of the delimited text file is determined by us, right? So for example, this specific website, right, it's using HTML, and so if I say show me the source of this page, you can see that there's lots of information stored here, and you can view individual HTML tags as your delimiters. That essentially all tags or all HTML tags, it's more complicated because they can be nested, but ultimately every tag or every like opening and closing angle bracket, a part of HTML syntax, really sort of like becomes your way of using a delimiter. Okay, and so delimiters are really what we can use to give our files some kind of structure, right? So you can use tabs, you can use new lines, you can use commas. For instance, CSV, comma separated value file types are always very popular. Okay, and it's really our choice. I think it's very easy to write a delimited text file. More challenging is to make sure that you properly read it, so that every single piece of that information is read back into the memory in the same sequence, using the same delimiters, and perhaps with some validation code in place which can facilitate it. So it's a very simple idea to create a delimited text file. You can see here that if you have an object and it has some values, it's easy to do something like this just by using the print writer. Okay, so a reader and writer hierarchy, this is just another view of the same, right? So if you look at this, at the top of the hierarchy here, if we look back at the reader and writer, this is somewhat abbreviated, right? So this version of the diagram is kind of it's friendlier towards us, because if you look at everything in this hierarchy, you realize that there are actually many more objects in the reader and writer hierarchy of objects in Java API, and they're all designed to work with text files. Okay, so for instance, you can use a line number reader, right? So you can essentially count line numbers. Okay, and pushback reader is just another kind of reader that you can use to populate your collection. There's also character array if you want to read information directly into the character array. So there are multiple classes which we're not going to cover in this presentation. Okay, but just be aware that you, if you're looking for specific type of functionality, you should probably not reinvent the wheel. You should basically go in and research what library classes may be already doing this work for you. Okay, so there's an impressive variety of facilities that exist in Java library, and like I said, we're going to explore certain types of these files. So the counterpart to writing is this reading text from a character stream. So another view of this hierarchy of objects is to open this link, which takes you to this website, where you can see that the reader hierarchy includes input stream reader, character array reader, string reader, and so forth and so forth. So you can essentially click on these objects and find out what the real documentation says about them. But this is kind of nice because it gives you how big each class is, how many methods exist in them, and are these any methods that you might want to use. All right, so just to let you know that there are diagrams like that which allows you to work with those. So the buffered reader extends the reader class and implements character-based input stream. So back to our diagram here, right? So this time we're looking at the reader hierarchy, and of course buffered reader is the one that you want to use for buffering your input-output operations, and of course it's part of the reader hierarchy, and so we can use, all we need to do is just, we can now use for reading the information, all we need to use is the buffer reader and the file reader, and we can start reading this information line by line or character by character. And for this, here's the example of the buffered reader. So the buffered reader does include a method which is a read line, right? So there is a read line, so that you can use buffered reader very effectively to open the file. Basically, the story goes again by saying, you know, paths, create the path object, use path object to create the file object. Books file here is an instance of a file object. You pass it to the file reader constructor, it takes it, then you construct the buffered reader out of it. Once you have the buffered reader, you have this buffer reader object which you can say read line, and it will be giving you strings out of that file very naturally. And of course, because many of these stages can generate exceptions, you need to wrap this in a try and catch statement. Okay, so later on we may have another example of this code. All right, so the reader class is abstract. Okay, the reader class is abstract, and once again, if you look at the diagram here, you see that the name of the class is placed in italics font, which generally speaking indicates that this is an abstract class. So there are some abstract methods on this list, and that's okay. All right. So the reader has the hierarchy, and the buffered reader and file reader have different types of constructors that you can use. And because you're opening this file for reading, okay, it's natural to expect that the file already exists, and if it doesn't exist, of course it says file not found exception, and that's very convenient that you can catch that exception and notify your user or try to recover from this error and so forth. So the classes for opening a character file for buffered reading is the buffered reader and the file reader, right? So generally speaking, you want to use file reader, but you want to wrap it around the buffered reader so that you stay with the buffered reading type of mode in order to essentially improve the performance. And it's also safer when you use buffered reading. So this is already an example from our prior example. So the buffered reader class, so it's this class right here, buffered reader, okay, the one which can give you information. We already know that its constructor is taking the file reader as the parameter. Okay, so you can read, okay, you can read an array of characters of a specific length. You can also read line. Okay, so this doesn't give you a flexibility of instant conversion to other primitive types such as integer or boolean or double, right? What a buffered reader does, it is designed specifically to process a series of characters, right? Series of characters can be placed in an array of characters, or you can basically say read line, and this way read me the entire line of text, or you can read individual characters, right? You can also skip and say skip the specified number of characters. So these are pretty much the things that you can do with buffered reader. All right. So common methods here, of course, they all throw the same exception, IO exception, if something goes wrong, right? So if reading fails, basically, you know, there is a reason for it, and that's okay. So here's an example of reading the text file, and again, I think it's just another example where we say file reader buffered reader, and just keep using read line, and we just echo back everything where it say print line. Okay, so we just echo it back, and once we're done with the file, we say close the file. Always a good practice to do something like that. So more complete example of reading a delimited file right there, right? So let's just create another segment.